Recording was paused.
No.
Okay, now I am. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay. So basically, I've got a picture in my mind. I have to encode it, put it into words. I have to send the words. We have the message going across. She has to receive it. In other words, she's got to hear it. But then she's got to make sense of those words. So what she has to do is I have encoded it, she has to decode. In other words, she's got to make sense of those words, okay? And she decodes it, she makes sense of those words, and from that she forms a mental picture. And in her mind, she sees a long, tall glass with lots of black, bubbly liquid called Coca-Cola, and then she's got to close the loop and give me feedback, and she says, yes, no problem. Okay. And 5 minutes later, she comes outside with this tall glass of Coca-Cola. I look at her and say, what the hell is wrong? Right? It is after 12. Come on, obviously, it would have been a beer. And that basically is your communication loop. From a concept, you encode, you send, you have the message, she's got to receive it, she's got to decode it, she forms a picture, she closes the loop, and she gives feedback. And that is your communication loop. Is that making sense so far? All okay with that? So what we're saying is basically communication, the most important lesson from this, and it's a very simple model, but the most important lesson is communication is only effective and is only complete. Communication is only effective and only complete when that picture looks the same as that picture. Until the two pictures look the same, you're not done. You haven't got it right. Okay. And that's what happens so often in relationships, be they personal relationships, but what I'm talking about here is particularly work relationships. I say something to a colleague, I say something to an employee or a staff member, and in my mind it was obvious, but in their mind it was not so obvious. So saying to my wife, bring me something nice and cold to drink, in my mind, that's obviously going to be a beer, but that's not so obvious in her mind. So what you're going to do is check the mental pictures. Right, make sure that what you see is what they see, and keep going until it's right. So check the mental pictures, make sure that the two pictures look the same. Another point to make is if you look at communication, where do we mess it up? Where do we mess it up? I did not use the right words. My encoding was incorrect. I might not have sent it properly. There could be a whole lot of noise that interferes with that message, which means she doesn't receive it, or she doesn't receive it properly. She doesn't decode it. She doesn't form the right picture. She might not give feedback. So what we're seeing is quite often we mess up communication at every possible place, and that's why communication is so often an issue or a problem in most relationships. So check the mental pictures and make sure that what you see is the same as what they see, and basically that is model number one. Are we okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. We then go on to something else. All right. And here we are looking at transactional analysis, which is based on the work of a psychologist by the name of Eric Berne. And he was not worried initially about communication. He was worried about personality. He just wanted to understand, why are people the way they are? Why are some people loud and noisy and other people are not, etc., etc. So he was not worried about communication. He just wanted to understand personality and why people are the way they are. And he came up with a theory on personality. And basically, if you understand his theory, he's saying the following. He's saying that there are, in everybody's personality, any one of us in this NMP group, that there are different parts to our personality, and he calls those parts ego states, different parts to our personality. And he says in every person there is a parent part, right, or a parent ego state. And that is basically the part of our personality that can dominate, right? And everyone has within their personality a dominating side, a parent side. We also all have the ability to be rational and logical, and that's what he calls the adult, right? We have an adult part to our personality, we have a parent part. He calls them ego states, an adult ego state or a parent ego state. He also says we all have the ability, the capacity to be emotional, and that is what he calls the child side. We have an emotional side to our personality, as well as having a rational and factual side. So any one person, in their personality, we have all three. Everyone has a parent, an adult, a child. We all have the capacity to dominate. We have the capacity to be rational and logical. We have the capacity to be emotional. There's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. That's what we have in everyone's personality. He takes it and he says you can subdivide some of these. We can split the parent into two parts. You get what we call a nurturing parent, and what we call a critical parent. So he's saying we can all be dominant, but you can be dominant in a caring way or dominant in a critical way. Best way to describe it is if you are a parent of a child, let's say a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and you've got the 7-year-old and the 7-year-old has been misbehaving, you say, do that once more and I'll give you a hiding. That would be parent dominant, but it would be critical. But you've also got your 5-year-old who falls down and scratches their knee and you pick them up and you dust them off and you pacify them. That would still be dominant, but it would be nurturing. And as much as we've got the critical, we've got the nurturing or caring. And this example is talking about you as children, but this is you in general, right? It's not about how an adult deals with a child. It's basically that you can be dominant, critical, dominant, caring. And we have all of those subparts. Okay. He says we've got the adult, that is, adults is your basically your logical, your factual side. We do not subdivide that. And then you've got the child. The child, remember, is your emotional side. And in the child, you can be emotional happy or emotional unhappy. All right, and you've got what we call the natural or free child. Right, that's your happy, enthusiastic, laughing, joking, passionate side. And then you've got your angry, right, or what we call adapted, your angry child, which is your unhappy, sulking, negative, go away, leave me alone, don't like you, it's emotional unhappy person versus emotional happy. Excuse me. And that's basically how he starts understanding the personality. Saying is in everybody's personality, there are 3 ego states and there are the subparts. Everyone has parent, adult, child. Everyone has nurturing, critical, logical, and they have the angry child and the free natural child. We have all of those parts within our personality. And basically that's how he's starting to understand or explain the personality. However, if everybody had the same parts, we would all be identical, but we're all different. Why are we all different? It's fairly obvious. As much as we have all of those ego states and we have the sub-ego states or subparts, as much as we've got that, we've also all got a dominant part, a dominant ego state. So some people are by nature very adult and rational and calm and quiet, and others are very dominant and they can be critical and nurturing, but they're assertive and dominant. That's their dominant ego state, is they use parent, others use adult. And some people are child, they're passionate, enthusiastic, they're happy, they're sad, they're angry, they're glad. So as much as we've got all of the ego states, we tend to have a dominant ego state. Some people are parents, some are adults, some are child, and the subdivisions. And again, and I emphasize it many, many times, it's not a right or wrong. That's what we have, all right? And depending on what a person's dominant ego state is or dominant part, that will then impact on how they behave, which eventually we will see will impact on their communication. So far, happy? Making sense?
Makes sense.
Okay, cool. So now let's understand it before we go into the communication side. Let's have a look, and again, let's maybe it's controversial, and I don't want it to become too political, but let's have a look at some of the leaders in South Africa, past and present, and have a look at what is their dominant ego state. We talked about one earlier. His name is Julius Malema. What is he? Dominant parent, adult, or child? What is his dominant ego state?
I would say child, adult.
Adult. Okay. Anyone else?
I think it's parent.
Child, parent.
I would say parent, critical.
He's very free, that guy.
Okay. So in my view,
Child, yes, right.
Juju, or if you look at Juju, in my views, I see a very strong child. He gets upset about things, he gets happy, he gets sad, he's passionate, he speaks out. So you're seeing, in my view, a very strong child, but you're also seeing in Juju a strong parent. Hey? He's quite assertive, he's quite forceful, he's quite dominant. So in Juju, I would see a strong combination of child, which can be angry and it can be happy, but I'm also seeing quite a strong parent, and the parent tends to be quite a strong critical parent. If you have a look at his behavior in Parliament, it's emotional, he gets upset about things, right or wrong, and I'm not criticizing the person, I'm just saying we can understand that individual. So I would see in Juju a strong child with quite a bit of parent. Let's have a look at somebody different. Donald Trump. What is Donald Trump's dominant ego state?
Child.
Parent, critical.
Right. So basically, in Donald,
It's parent critical.
I'm seeing child.
Parent, critical.
Very critical.
It is parent critical. You will do what I tell you to do. And he's emotional. Yeah. He sends out Twitters and tweets and whatever at 2 o'clock in the morning, etc., etc. Okay, so I'm seeing a very strong critical parent, but I'm also seeing an angry child. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Compare him
Yes.
to Barack Obama. What do we see in Barack Obama?
Parent nurturing.
Parent nurturing.
I see parent nurturing, and I see a lot of adult.
Adult.
Rational, logical, but if he is parent, it's the nurturing parent rather than the critical parent. Can you see the difference?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, if we go back in history in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, what was he? Parent, adult, or child?
Parent nurturing.
Parent adult.
Parent, nurturing, and a very strong adult, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. And then he gets replaced by Thabo Mbeki. What is Thabo Mbeki's dominant ego state?
Oh, parent and adult, I think.
Adult.
Parent nurturing
More
adult.
of an adult.
In Thabo Mbeki, I see
And parent critical.
very strong adult, very, very strong adult, and a critical parent. He can be quite critical, but very
Yes.
rational, very logical, very factual, right? In him, I saw a very strong adult with a little bit of the critical parent. And then along comes Jacob.
Nurturing parent.
Child.
Every time.
Child.
I see child, and I see a critical parent. Hey, he's quite tough.
Yeah.
You will listen to me. You will do what I say. He's quite a traditional guy, so he very much expects people to listen and to do what he says.
Donald Trump.
And yeah, and he's quite a bit of child. I think he's perhaps a bit better than Donald Trump, but I don't know. But we do see child and we see parent. Okay, but more the critical parent. And then Cyril.
So, Carl, when you say adult, is that just being somebody that's rational?
Yeah, it's rational, it's logical, it's factual, it's
Factual.
quite calm.
Thank you.
Okay. Cyril, what do we see in Cyril?
Adult.
Adult. I would agree.
And a bit of parent as well.
Adult. Maybe a bit of parent, but it tends to be more nurturing than critical, huh?
No, he's more
More
adult.
nurturing because I think he really cares and he always refers to his family that he would not like this and that to happen to his family. So I would say parent on a more nurturing way.
To me, the dominant one is adult, but yes, if there's parent, it's a nurturing parent. If you watch him with the briefings that he's been given on the COVID-19, it's very much a care on concern. It's very rational, very factual, but there's a lot of concern as well. So I think it's a nurturing parent, but there's definitely a dominant adult. Okay, and guys, remember, it's not right or wrong. One is not better than the other. It's just people are different. Okay, so far making sense. Now, what you should be able to do by now is you should be able to look at your line manager, all right, and decide whether your boss is parent, adult, or child, all right? So get a feel for your line manager, get a feel for your colleagues, get a feel for the people working for you. Because the way I communicate with a child is different to an adult, is different to a parent. So this just gives us some awareness of other people. Okay, so get a feel for what you think your boss is, your colleagues, and your staff members. Okay. This does not tell me anything about communication. It just helps me to hopefully understand people. We then say, okay, cool, that's great, makes sense, interesting, but how do I use this to ensure effective communication? And basically, when it comes to effective communication, there are three basic rules that you need to be aware of and three basic rules that you need to remember. And rule number one says, for effective communication, you have to have what we call parallel or complementary communication. Parallel or complementary communication could be something like that. The adult of one person saying to the adult of another one, good morning, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, and yourself. It's rational, it's logical, it's calm. You can have basically child to child, which is one person saying, let's do this. Other one says, yes, it's a great idea. Lots of fun, energy, enthusiasm. And they go off and they do something. And that's your child to child. All right. Rule number one says parallel communication works. Adult to adult, child to child. It is possible to have parent to parent. Okay. But be careful here, because if you've got one dominating character and another dominating character, you could well have conflict. Okay. But an example of parallel parent to parent would be two old guys sitting on the park bench in the sun chatting. Youngster walks past with his torn jeans, music going full blast. The one old guy says to the other old guy, the youth of today is disgusting. The other one says, yes, what is the world coming to? They're kind of shouting at each other, but they're saying the same thing. That would be parent to parent, critical to critical. But they're not dominating each other. But be careful of that one, you could have conflict. But rule number one says you need to have parallel or complementary communication. Happy so far?
Happy.
Rule number 2, in my view, is fairly obvious. If parallel works, you've got to avoid the opposite, which is what we would call cross-communication. And cross-communication, basically, let me give you my favorite example. Let me think of an example. Okay, let me give you my favorite example. Let's imagine I've had a normal day at the office. Let's say we're not under lockdown. I've had a normal day at the office and I'm driving home. And as I'm driving home, I get a call from my friend. He says, hey, Carl, let's go for a quick beer. I said, no, I've got to get home. He says, come on, 1 beer, half an hour. It's not a lot of time. I said, okay, cool, but I'm only having 1. He says, yeah. He's also only having 1. So we go to the local pub, we order a beer, we start drinking the beer. Whilst we're drinking that beer, we start talking about, the Springbok cricket, which is good and bad and happy and sad. So we get ourselves to a stage when we're talking about that cricket where we decide we better have a second beer just to steady our nerves. So we have a second beer, then we talk about the soccer, which is equally dismal. So we have a third beer to steady our nerves, blah, 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 blah. And each time we order another round, I think to myself, I should phone my wife and tell her that I'm going to be late. But the problem is that when we are no longer talking sport, we're talking politics, religion, we're solving world problems. We've had a good number of beers. And when you've had many beers and you're solving world problems, you do not have time to stop and make a phone call. So basically, I forget to phone. All right, I stagger home at about 10:30, not too sober, forgot to phone. I get home and I find my wife is not talking to me. I don't know why, all right? But anyway, I'm tired and basically I go to sleep, all right? Fall asleep because I'm tired. I wake up the next morning, my head is pounding, babalas is bad, feeling very sorry, in a bad mood. My wife is still not talking to me. I still don't know why, but that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is I'm getting dressed and there are no socks. Where the hell are my socks? Because of babalas, because of mood, because of headache, because of whatever and everything, I say to my wife, where the hell are my socks? What have you done with them? That's me and that's wife. Right, so I'm saying, where the hell are my socks? She's not too chuffed with me. I was the one who staggered home at 10:30. She says, Carl, if you had a little bit more self-control and a bit more self-discipline, you'd be able to get dressed. So what have we got? We've basically got conflict. I'm trying to dominate her. She's trying to dominate me. And what we have got is cross-communication. Parallel communication works. Cross-communication doesn't work. Happy with that? Does that make sense? All okay?
Yes.
Okay, let me just do this. Musa in and George. Okay, so parallel works, cross-communication doesn't work, and now we go on to rule number 3. And they are all important, but probably in my view, the most important is rule number 3. And rule number 3 says, for effective communication, you have to have empathy and understanding for others. Empathy and understanding for others. Okay, so again, we've got 2 people, parent, adult, child there, another person, parent, adult, child there. And again, I'll use my favorite example, myself, and let's imagine that's my wife. Okay, and let's imagine I've had a normal day at the office and I go home and I've had a normal day at the office. And let's imagine for the purpose of this conversation and example, let's imagine I'm normally fairly adult. My wife, however, has had a day from hell. Okay, regardless of whether she's parent, adult, child, that doesn't matter. She's had a day from hell. So she's upset, she's angry, she's frustrated, she's irritated, everything because she's had a day from hell. So regardless of whether she's normally parent, adult, or child, at the moment she is frustrated, she's angry, she's upset. So she is child, right? I am adult, she gets home first, I get home second. I walk into the house as an adult and I say what an adult would typically say, which is an adult comment, which is, hi, how are you? How was your day? And she basically has had a day from hell and she's upset and frustrated, so she starts telling me about her day. This happened, then that happened, then he said, then she said, then they did. And I look at her and all I see is a ball of emotion. Upset and angry and frustrated and all of this stuff. And I look at her and I give her a good adult response. And the adult response is, if you're going to get so upset, you'll never solve any of your problems. Okay, what's the consequence of that?
Dat kan ook het was.
Hmm?
You're going to find your clothes on a porch.
Exactly. So this is interesting. What is going to happen is I'm going to come in here, adult, I see she's frustrated, angry, upset. I say, wow, if you're going to be so emotional, you'll never solve any of your problems. And what I'm saying, interestingly, is 100% correct, right? Because you don't solve your problems when you're all upset and emotional. So I'm 100% correct and I'm 100% incorrect. Because although you don't solve your problems when you're upset, that is not what she needs to hear. That is not what she wants to hear. So rule number 3 says you have to have empathy and understanding for the other party. So there's nothing wrong with me coming in at adult. That's fine. I come in at adult, but I see, wow, she is a child, right? She's upset. She's frustrated. So what do I do? What do I do? Because giving her that rational response is not going to help me. What are my options? Give me some ideas.
Try to calm her down.
Okay, try to calm her down. Good. What else? Other ideas?
Pour a glass of wine in and sit and listen. That's it.
I like the line. Okay, so bottom line is same scenario. I come in and I see the person is child. What do we learn? We know that parallel communication works, cross communication doesn't work. Rule number 3 says we need to have empathy and understanding for other people. So basically, I come in there, what I could do, I've got 2 choices. The one option is I come in an adult, I see she's there, what I could do is go to child, right? I can say, oh, what happened? Ish, tell me, what happened? And basically what I do is I allow her to tell me. And guys, this is for the guys, not the girls. All you have to do in this situation is you just keep saying, and then, okay, and you just let her talk. And she tells you once, and she tells you twice, and she tells you a 3rd time, and you say, and then she tells you it again. But basically, and you got to have empathy in doing that, but basically what are you doing is you're allowing her to tell and talk and tell and talk. So you go to child. You don't have to become as emotional, but you have some empathy and understanding for where that person is. And she tells me, and she tells me, and she tells me, and she tells me. The more she tells me, eventually she starts to calm down. She's got it off her chest. And then I can say, look, you've had a bad day. What do we do about this? What do we do about that? What do we do about the following? And now I can move to the adult because I've allowed her to get rid of that emotion and frustration. So the same rules apply. Parallel works, cross communication doesn't. And rule number 3 says you need to have empathy and understanding. Understand where that person is coming from. Understand what that person is doing. The other option that I had, it would depend on the nature of the relationship you have with that person. The other option is I come in an adult, right? I see she's a child. What I could do is go up to parent. Huh? Could go up to parent. Then it is nurturing parent, not critical parent. And Roxanne or Roxy, that's probably what you were talking about. And then I say, okay, you've had a terrible day. You sit there, you relax. I'm going to get you a glass of wine. I'm going to sort this out. I'm going to sort that out. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix that. And depending on the nature of the relationship, you still got parallel communication. Guys, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Parallel works, cross communication doesn't work. You need to have empathy and understanding for others. And this becomes particularly important when you're dealing with your staff, obviously, but it is also very important when you're dealing with a customer. Eh? When you've got an unhappy customer, where are they at? Parent, adult, or child? Where's an unhappy customer?
Oh, child.
Yeah.
Child.
They're child. They're frustrated, they're angry. And even if you weren't wrong or whatever, it's not about who's right or wrong. It's about the fact that they're frustrated. And basically at that stage, when I'm an angry customer, I do not want somebody telling me to calm down. I want somebody to hear how frustrated and how angry I am. So basically, let's understand it. That doesn't mean I'm admitting we were wrong, but wow, tell me about this. I can see this has upset you. I can see how frustrated you are. And basically, you let them get it off their chest. And then you can say, okay, so let's go up to adult. You don't say that, but you go up to adult. How do we address this? How do we address that? Kind of makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So those are the 3 basic rules. A couple of other things to remember is how do you deal with somebody who's very, very parent? And quite often that would apply to somebody who's your boss, particularly if the power base is an issue. Right? Somebody has more power than you. So basic guideline, and it doesn't always work, but your best bet is if somebody is very, very parent, let's say it's your boss, they're very parent, they like you to do a lot of that, huh? They don't come and say, what do you think? They say, you must get this done, get that done. And there you see they are parent and they're talking as such to you as the child. How do you deal with that? Because you disagree with them. They say you must. How do you get them to kind of think about it? What you have to do is you've got to get them from parent to adults, all right? Because that's where you can actually have a rational discussion with them. But you need to be able to get them from parent to adult. And what you do is you never tackle that parent without having facts. Right? You've got to have the facts. And that won't work every single time, but that's where you basically want to get them to calm down slightly and just say, okay, I hear you, yeah, cool. I don't disagree with them, but then I'm saying, what about this? And how would that work? So I'm almost a confused child. almost that confused child of, hey, I hear you, but what about this, what about this, what about this, what about that? And what you're trying to do is to get them to rational, the logical, the adult. Okay. Doesn't always work, but that's your best bet. If you've got somebody who's very parent, you need to do that. Okay. Happy with that? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. And that's basically your parent, adult, child. That's your transactional analysis. Parallel works. Cross communication doesn't. You need empathy and understanding for others. The other model is the mental pictures. Check the mental pictures. Make sure that they look the same. And that's basically it around communication. Comfortable so far? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, then let's go on to something different and let's have a look at assertiveness. Can somebody give me their view, their definition of what does it mean to be assertive? What does it mean to be assertive?
To be firm and fair.
To be firm and fair, good. What else?
Decisive.
Fact.
Decisive, good.
To
What
be
else?
stern.
To
To be
know
stern.
fact. Fact should have factual.
Factual, if I'm hearing you correctly, because you're breaking up. To make clear statements, correct. All right. To be direct, I'm seeing there from Donovan.
Yes.
Correct, that's good. So all of the stuff coming through on the chat I would agree with. So basically assertiveness, and let's just give you a definition here. We've talked communication. Assertive behavior is interaction that is direct, it is honest, and it is respectful. And those three words are very important. It is direct. You say it as you see it. It is honest. If you don't like it, you don't like it. All right? It's not beating around the bush. It's being direct, it's being honest. But very, very importantly, it is respectful. Because if I'm direct and I'm honest, but I'm not respectful, the chances are I would be coming across as aggressive rather than assertive. Direct, honest, and respectful. Levels of assertiveness are best understood when measured on a scale. All right, so if you want to understand assertiveness, got the scale, we've got two extremes. On this extreme, you've got people who are non-assertive. On that extreme, you've got people who are aggressive, all right? And if you want a true assertiveness, it would be that middle point between those extremes. That is assertive. I don't know if you ever get to that exact middle point, but it basically is between non-assertive and aggressive. It is that middle point. Okay. All right. Happy so far?
Happy.
Now, basically, assertiveness is an interesting concept. It's a concept that's easy to talk about, but not always so easy to do. Some people are fortunate. They tend to be assertive. Some people tend to be very dominant, and they're on the aggressive side. And a large number of people are more on the non-assertive side. And you can look at it in terms of different populations and groups. For example, your Americans tend to be quite assertive people, whereas your South Africans are possibly more non-assertive. And if we have a look at South Africans as a generalization, and we said we tend perhaps to be a little bit more on the non-assertive side. Okay, so we're perhaps more on this side, Americans are perhaps more on that side. But if we have a look at being non-assertive, in other words, not always shouting up, not always saying what we want to say, kind of being very respectful, but not that honest and direct, what is the advantage of that? Why do we tend to be like that? Because if there was no advantage, we wouldn't do it, right? So what's the benefit? What's the benefit? What's the advantage of being non-assertive?
No, according to me, I think it's avoiding confrontation. Yeah.
Right. Your biggest advantage of being non-assertive, and it's not really an advantage, but it's seen as an advantage, is that we avoid conflict. We avoid confrontation. And most people like to be liked. And if I'm non-assertive and I don't fight back, and then I'm a nice guy, I don't have to fight. So I avoid conflict is a big advantage. But also everybody likes me. So I'm the nice guy. Everybody likes me. And that's cool. But there's a problem. That's the advantage. What's the downside? What's the negative of being non-assertive?
You're weak.
You are seen to be weak, correct? What else?
Will never be taken serious.
Yeah, don't worry about
When
what...
you have something to say.
Yeah, don't bother what she's saying. Doesn't matter. Ignore them. Sorry, what
People
was that?
take advantage of you.
People take advantage of you. People don't take you seriously. People ignore what you have to say. But hey, you're a nice guy, so whatever. And that's the negative of being non-assertive. The advantage is I avoid conflict, but the disadvantage is not taken seriously, etc., etc. And what happens to a lot of people who are non-assertive is that basically they're nice guy, yes, sir, whatever, yes, sir, whatever. But that becomes very, very frustrating, right? And it becomes frustrating because you're always saying yes, sir, no problem, yes, sir, no problem. And the problem with that is that basically what happens is I'm doing yes, no problem, yes, no problem, yes, no problem. And I get more and more frustrated because I just say yes, no problem. And then eventually, once or twice a year, I get really frustrated because nobody takes me seriously. And then what happens is that person goes from being non-assertive to being aggressive. And they get upset and they throw their toys out of the cot and nobody damn well listens to me in this place and nobody takes me seriously, etc., etc. And what we're seeing is that they are not moving from being non-assertive to being assertive. We're moving from non-assertive right over assertive to aggressive. They become emotional, they become frustrated because nobody damn well listens to me, whatever that may be. Does that make sense? And then
Yes.
what happens is they go back to being non-assertive, feeling very embarrassed because they threw their toys out of the cot and they got all upset. And they stay there in the non-assertive for about 6 months. And then 6 months later, another explosion. And that's inappropriate. It's normal, it's understandable, but it's not effective. What is more effective is instead of allowing myself to become so frustrated that I have to explode, is stand up for my rights a bit more, become a bit more assertive, and it's a slow process, but stand up for my rights, speak out, disagree when I need to disagree, and in other words, not allow myself to be so frustrated that I have to explode. Guys, does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And can you see now why I started before we took a break, excuse me, with EQ, emotional control, all right? It's the ability to control those emotions, know those emotions, and it's the ability to try and move towards the assertive and not allow yourself to get so frustrated that you need to explode. Okay, happy so far?
Happy.
Okay. Now, what is interesting is, so assertiveness is that middle point, and the easiest way I can understand assertiveness, and again, I repeat, it's easy to understand, it's not so easy to always apply. But the easiest way I can understand assertiveness is to think about rights. What are your rights in any situation? And basically, assertiveness means I do not allow anyone to infringe on my rights. But remember, I have to be respectful. So as much as nobody may infringe on my rights, I may not infringe on the rights of somebody else. Exactly. So basically, assertiveness in simple terms means you don't stand on my toes, I don't stand on your toes. I will expect you to adhere to my rights and I will adhere to your rights. In a situation, I have the right to speak. If I have the right to speak, I will speak. And if I speak, I expect other people to listen because that is respectful. But as much as I expect other people to listen to me, I must be willing to listen to them. Okay, it is about rights. And again, easy to say, not so easy to do, but make sure that you are maintaining your rights and you are speaking out as much as you need to, and appropriately so. And so remember, when you want to be assertive, those who need to be more assertive, be careful, don't be stupid, all right? There's certain times where it is a good idea just to shut up, all right? And sometimes when the boss is in a really bad mood, that is not the time to decide to practice your assertiveness. Okay? That's where perhaps you just keep quiet for the moment, but the concept is you speak up, make sure you do not infringe on the rights of others, and don't let them infringe on your rights. Okay, happy so far? Now, let's have a look at it. And here, a quick question, and you can put it in the chat or you can put on your mics. If we have a look at people who are non-assertive, and there's many factors, but what is the most common personality issue that we would find in a person who's non-assertive? And there's many, but there's one that's very common. What do we see in many people who are non-assertive? Personality issue.
Most
Someone
of them
that's
are very timid.
Timid, give me other words, good word. Well, give me something else.
Introverts.
Not so much introverts, strangely enough, because some introverts can be very, very assertive. All right, so it is possible, but it's not automatically that introverts lack assertiveness. But I've heard timid. What else?
confidence.
What about it?
Lack of it.
Lack of it, quite.
Lack.
Yeah. So one concept that is common amongst most people who are non-assertive is a lack of self-belief or a lack of confidence, which then would link to that timid. All right, passive, Nicolette, yes. Indirect, yes. But that passive and indirect is usually driven by a lack of self-belief. So a lot of people are non-assertive. You can almost hear them thinking. If you had to hear their thought process, it's almost like, I might be wrong, I won't say anything. I don't know if this is correct, I won't say anything. They might not like it, I won't say anything. And that is basically a lack of self-belief, right? It's a lack of confidence. I might be wrong, so let me not say anything. And what is interesting, and that's not the only factor, but it's one of the most common factors that we see in people who are non-assertive, is that lack of self-belief, lack of confidence. What is interesting is, what do we see in people who are aggressive? If a lack of confidence causes people to be non-assertive, what causes people to be aggressive? And it's a trick question.
Overconfident.
Okay, overconfidence, it's a trick question. So no, you can't. Overconfident is like overhappy.
Ego.
Because they've got a very forceful behavior.
Ego definitely comes in there. They are forceful, they're dominant. What causes that? If a lack of confidence causes non-assertive,
The same thing. Lack of confidence causes people to be aggressive.
100%. And it's not always the case. Some people are just arrogant and got a big ego, and that can cause them to be. Sorry, what? Yeah. But Bantu, what we do see is a lot of people who are aggressive, it's driven by, that aggressive behavior is driven by exactly the same thing. It's driven by a lack of confidence. But it manifests itself in different ways. For some people, there's a thought in their head saying, I might be wrong, let me say nothing. And for other people, there's a deep thought saying, I might be wrong, don't you dare disagree with me. So there's this concept of attack is the best form of defense. So you will do this, you will do that, don't you dare disagree, this is how it's going to be. And quite often that aggressive behavior is driven by an insecurity. So it's quite weird. The same concept could be driving both the non-assertive and the aggressive. As I said, some people are just arrogant and who have big egos. That's a slightly different thing there. But there's a lot of very aggressive people. If you have to get to know them, you would find that they are pretty insecure people. Same thing that happens, which is very, very interesting. Okay, happy with that so far? Easy to say, not so easy to do. Some people are fortunate, they're born or they grow up or they're raised in a way which makes them assertive. But for a lot of people, it is a challenge because of who we are. But what is interesting is our level of assertiveness is also quite often influenced by our upbringing, which is influenced by how a person was raised by their parents. But it's also quite often interesting because it can be influenced by the culture, right? Certain cultures, children are raised to be very respectful. You don't speak back, you don't disagree, you say yes sir, yes dad, yes mom. So it's not only your personality, but it's your upbringing, which is quite often influenced by your culture. Okay, does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it does.
So interesting cultures, if you have a look at it, and I don't think there's anyone on the program, there may be, I'm not sure. But if you have a look at your very strong Afrikaner, a very strong Afrikaner, it's very interesting if you have a look at their level of assertiveness, and you have a look at their upbringing, and you have a look at the culture. Because if you have a look at the upbringing of a typical Afrikaner child, there's a strong thing of a respect. Hey? You respect the father, you respect the grandfather, there's a lot of ich in meneer, in dominee, and all of that stuff.
Worm,
yeah, worm and
it's other on name basis.
No.
Of women tani.
Yeah, women tani and ich and meneer in worm and whatever. So it's quite interesting because what we're seeing then is very, very much you must respect. And so what you will find, and it is very, very interesting, is what you'll find is that as they get older, there are some interesting challenges in terms of speaking up and speaking out. But let's have a look at a different culture. And here I'm generalizing vastly, and I'm basing it on what I know. It may not always be accurate.
Sorry, before we go on with what you want to say, I just want to find out, with the Afrikaans culture, where would they basically fall? Under the non-assertives or the assertive side? Because I mean, there's not a lot of love or anything. It's just it's like they're very hard people.
Okay, that's why I want to come back. Just hang on to that, Roxy. I want to come back to it in a moment. But let's have a look at something else. Let's have a look at, and this is a huge generalization because you'll find many differences. But if we have a look at a lot of the black cultures in South Africa, where do they tend to be? Assertive or non-assertive or aggressive?
Zulus?
No, I don't want to go Zulus, Xhosa, whatever, just in general.
I would say aggressive.
No.
Non-assertive.
I would say a lot of black cultures are more non-assertive. because I think
Non-assertive.
they're raised to respect. They're raised
Yeah,
not
they're
to
very
speak back.
submissive.
Sorry? So basically, a lot of the black cultures, as I see it, is very much raised to respect, not to speak back, to accept the boss, to accept the father, etc., etc. What is interesting, and this comes back to your question, I think, Roxy, is if we then have a look at it, what do we see? And this is my view, I may not be correct, but I'm seeing a lot of black people tending to be more on the non-assertive, right? You respect, you don't speak back, etc., etc. You respect your elder, you respect the older person, which becomes quite an interesting challenge for a lot of black people. And I think it's changed over the last few decades and the last few generations. But we go back a couple of generations, we had an interesting situation where you would take this young guy, let's say a young black guy, and he's bright, he's 25 years old, he's sharp, he's bright, and you decide you're going to make him the supervisor because he's bright and he's sharp. And you promote him and make him the supervisor. He's 25-year-old black guy, and you say, listen, one of the first things you need to do is that old guy, that 55-year-old guy, he comes late every day, hey? You need to address that. You need to sort him out. And for that 25-year-old young black guy, that is very, very difficult because his culture is you respect the old guy. He's 55, he's my elder. And that made it very, very tough. I think it's changed over the generations, but it makes it very tough for them to then be the dominant one and address the late coming with the 55-year-old. So I think it puts a lot of people more on this side. I think with our younger generations, we're seeing it changing. I think we're seeing a greater move towards the assertiveness. Okay, that's my view on that one. What is interesting then, Roxanne, is if we take a look at the Afrikaner. Let's have a look at the Afrikaner. And again, it's my perception. I may be wrong. But what are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of respect. Ja, meneer, u, and dominee, and all of that stuff. But what is interesting that I see what is different between, let's call it the black guy, if I can use that term, and the Afrikaner, is that with the black guy, there's a lot very respectful. With the Afrikaner, there seems to be a different element that comes in as well. On the one hand, there is that non-assertive, but there's almost an element of if I have to ja boss my boss, and you work for me, then you must ja boss me. Okay, so and again, this is just my view. So what am I seeing is I'm seeing both non-assertive and a little bit aggressive. To my boss, it's yes, sir. To my employees, it's you better do what I tell you to do. Roxy, does that kind of correlate with what you were seeing?
Yes.
Okay. And again, it's not right or wrong, it's just my perception, but that's pretty much what I'm seeing is in your typical Afrikaner, it's very respectful upwards, and there's quite a bit of domination downwards. Whereas in a lot of the more black people, it tends to be quite a respectful group of people. Okay, and that's just my view, it may be wrong. Okay, happy so far? Any comments, questions?
Happy.
Okay. What is interesting, an interesting group, if we're just going to talk about different cultures and different nations, and this is again from the little bit that I know, but an interesting group to me, if you're looking at the concept of assertiveness, is the Jewish people. And here I'm talking about South African Jewish because I don't know the Israeli Jewish. But if you have a look at your typical South African Jewish person, in my view, they are fairly assertive. Right? They don't have a problem standing up for their rights. They speak out. They get what is theirs. So I don't see a problem there. I think they are fairly assertive. They stand up for their rights. And it was interesting because I was talking to some Jewish people, and one lady in particular explained something to me which I didn't know, which I thought was very interesting. And she explained to me the core Jewish family. She says, if you look at your typical South African Jewish family, it usually consists of mom and dad and usually two kids, maybe three, but usually two kids, mom and dad. And basically the actual way that function, the family functions is very, very interesting because basically they're very clear roles. Dad's role, usually in a typical Jewish family, is to go out, get a good job and to provide. And he provides a nice house and he provides holidays and a nice car. In other words, he's got to provide for his family. What is also interesting, she explained to me, is if you look at the Jewish family, the core, the center, the most important thing in the Jewish family is the child. The child is the center of that family. Everything revolves around that child. So dad's job, as I've already said, is get out there, get a good job, make sure you provide decent house, decent education, blah, blah, blah. Mom's role is then to make sure that she takes care of those kids. All right, dad has provided a good family, a good home, a good income, and mom's job is to provide for those kids. They are the center of the world in that family. And therefore, if Johnny wants horse riding, he gets horse riding. If Mary wants that, she gets that, and so and so. And basically, the parents then do everything that they can to provide for the children because they are the center. Which is really, really interesting because that means that when that child grows up, he or she grows up as the center of the universe in their mind. And therefore, you can understand why it is easy to be assertive because, hey, I'm the most important person around. And therefore, if I want this or I want that, I speak out, I ask for, and I usually get. So basically, dad comes home one day and little Johnny, who's 13, says, you know what, dad, my laptop, my computer is too slow. And dad will say, wow, that's a problem. What are we going to do? How do we fix this? I better get you a new one. Now that 13-year-old is 23 years and he works for you and he comes to me and says, hey, my computer's too slow. And you look at him and say, yeah, mine too. What do you want me to do about it? And this poor guy doesn't quite understand because you're not reacting like he thought you should react. So it's quite interesting to understand assertiveness. It's about who you are, your personality, your level of confidence, your level of self-belief, but it is compounded by your upbringing, your culture, your background, etc., etc. So it's not about a right or wrong, but it's saying, how do I make sure in a way that fits with my belief system and with my culture, how do I make sure that I am direct, I'm honest, and I am respectful? If I am the boss, I need to do certain things. I must be able to do those things. If somebody is not performing, I've got to be able to manage that. I've got to be able to address that. But there's always the element of respect. Guys, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, one other thing that I've also seen being one of the big influences of assertiveness is the environment. Managing a certain team, guys are very mature, so they know what is expected of them, they deliver, they don't want to run after them. Then you move to another team where guys are like, in a relaxed mode, then you must put some bit of assertiveness to get things done.
Yeah. And Bogiso, I think that's 100% correct. And it's basically your ability to read that situation and to understand that, this time I've got to do this, now I've got to do something else. What happens, which is a problem for a manager, is when they have just one style.
Yeah.
In other words, if my style is assertive, then I go into that mature team you were describing and I start shouting and calling the odds. All I'm going to do is upset those people. Or I'm very non-assertive and I'm always nice guy, and no matter what the environment, I'm nice guy. So it's that ability to use what you need when you need it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you're quite correct. Sometimes you need more, sometimes you need less. Sometimes you're fortunate, they've got the maturity you require, sometimes not. And it's that ability to read it and to modify. And as much as you'll have a team that's mature and immature, in one team you'll have the person who's mature and the one who's less mature. Yeah. In your team, with some people, you're going to be more assertive and more firm than with others. And it's that ability to do that. So yeah, very good point. Okay. Let's just then have a look at a couple of points on, so what do I do if I need to be more assertive? Now, you don't fix assertiveness in a sort of a 30-minute discussion here, but just a couple of pointers of what can one do to try and be more assertive, or what we call developing assertiveness. We say there, first thing there is control emotions. And why did I put that down there? Is because that's where I start getting so frustrated that I need to explode. And that's why the EQ becomes important, and control the emotions. I'm getting frustrated. Let's not get upset. In other words, let's deal with it before I get so angry that I need to explode. The next point there is state your feelings, don't display them. And that's an interesting one because a lot of people who are non-assertive don't know how to say they're unhappy, so they show they're unhappy. Their body language, their voice, you know what I mean? So if I know I'm non-assertive, I tend to, yeah, okay. That's really showing that I'm not okay, but I don't know how to say I'm not okay. So rather try very quietly to state your feelings, not to display them. An interesting one there is broken record technique. Now that applies to all of us, but these usually understood by the older generation, because those of you who are old enough will remember in the old days, before we had CDs and iTunes, etc., you used to buy LPs, records. And those of you who are old enough would know that you would have a record and you put it on a record player and it would have a scratch. And if you had an LP with a scratch, it would just go round and round and it would say the same thing over and over again. That's why we call it the broken record technique, is you just stick to what you believe. You don't have to shout, you don't have to scream, but you just keep saying, I believe A and B. I believe A and B. I believe A and B. And basically, eventually people will get frustrated enough, but they will at least hear that you believe A and B. You just keep sticking to your viewpoint. And then finally is what we call an I statement. An I statement is a technique that you use when you want to raise something with it, raise an issue with a person, when they are doing something that they have no right to do. So in other words, somebody's doing something, they are infringing on my rights. They have no right to do that, and I want to address it with them. I want to do it in a calm, assertive manner. I'm getting frustrated, but I don't want to get angry. This person, and quite often it's a small thing, it's a trivial thing. I use the example of I work in a big open plan office and some guy keeps coming to my desk. He borrows my stapler. He takes it to his desk right on the other side of the open plan office, and he never brings it back. I don't mind him using my stapler, but Aish, at least bring it back. The first time he does it and doesn't bring it back, I think, you know what, he probably forgot. The second time, I'm starting to get more and more angry. The language is getting worse and worse in my mind because this guy just refuses to bring the damn thing back. And it's a problem. And as much as it's a small thing, it's a problem because I suddenly need the stapler. I've got to stop. I've got to break my concentration. I've got to look around. I've got to get up. I've got to walk to his desk. I've got to bring it back. And it's not cool because it's my stapler. How do I address this with this guy? And the basic answer is I need to use what we call the I statement. Obviously, I control emotions, and then an I statement. An I statement is a way of addressing an issue when somebody is doing something they have no right to do. An I statement has the word I. Why is it I? Because it's about me. It's not about somebody else. It's about me. I'm the one who's frustrated about you using my stapler, not somebody else. Because remember, non-assertive people sometimes are too indirect and they talk about we or they. It's not about we or they, I. So it's honest. And if I'm going to address an issue that you take my stapler, you don't bring it back, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know why it's a problem, and you need to know how I feel about it. And in any order, but you can see there we've put feeling, action, and effect. You are not going to stop using my stapler and not bring it back if you don't know it's a problem, if you don't know why it's a problem, and if you don't know how I feel about it. So basically in any order, but you can start off by saying, I am frustrated by the fact that you take the stapler, action, and don't bring it back. The effect of that is when I need my stapler, I have to break my concentration, lose my train of thought, get up, go find it, and bring it back. Could I ask you, if you're going to use my stapler with the greatest pleasure, please do so, but please bring it back when you've used it. It's calm, it's non-emotional, it's rational. It is, by the time I've made that statement, they know what they're doing, the action, they know how I feel about it, and they know why it is a problem. That is an I statement. Okay, comfortable, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So we need to communicate. We need to be assertive. As a manager, you've got to be able to stand your ground. You've got to be firm. You've got to be direct. You've got to be honest. You've got to be fair. You've got to be respectful. You need to be able to stand up for your rights. Just one final thing. For people who tend to be less assertive and who need to be more assertive, basically just a simple way of doing that, particularly in a team context where you're in a team session or team environment. How do I make sure I'm more assertive? A nice way of doing it, if you are by nature a quieter person, is start asking questions. Because quite often I don't want to make a statement because I might be wrong. I don't want to say it must be, what about that, we must do this, we must. But if I turned what I think is a good idea into a question, what about this? Could we do that? Maybe we should try that. Although that's still a bit tentative, at least I'm being heard. People are starting to hear him. He's always got something to say. He's got questions. So a nice way to become more assertive, if you're not assertive in the initial stages, is just ask more questions. Make suggestions, proposals. What about this? Could we try this? Maybe that would work. It's still a bit tentative, but at least you are getting out there. You are being heard more. So that's a very nice, calm way to be heard more in a team context. Okay. Right, so that's assertiveness. You need to stand up for your rights, but we've said you need to be respectful. As much as you need to be assertive, you also need to be flexible. I don't stand on your toes, you don't stand on my toes. I need you to hear what I have to say, but I've also got to be willing to listen to what you have to say. Now, if you have a look at a definition of flexibility, there are usually two core components to flexibility. The one is open-minded, the other one is adaptable. Right? So if you say, tell me, what does it mean to be flexible? Quite often people say to be able to cope with change, to adapt, all right? And that's 100% correct. So I've taken that part out of the definition. I am not including coping with change and adapting. And the reason why is when you look at organizational dynamics, we'll spend a lot of time on change and adaptation. So for flexibility for managing and leading people, my core focus is your open-mindedness. All right, and I therefore have defined flexibility as is described as a person's willingness to consider the views of others. A flexible individual will change his or her approach or view if others can present valid alternatives to an issue. And it's very important that we understand if they can present valid alternatives to an issue. So flexibility, so I've got to have a balance. On the one hand, I've got to be assertive. On the other hand, I've got to be flexible. Assertive means if I believe A, I need to state that I believe A in a confident manner. I believe A because of this, this, and this. But as much as I believe A and I need to state it, I need to be open to the fact that there may be merit to B. Somebody's got an idea C, there could be merit to that. So it's basically saying, hey, I believe A, B, and C, or that's what I believe. If you've got other views, I'm willing to listen, but until you convince me otherwise, that's what I believe. But I am at least open and willing to consider the views of someone else. I'm passionate about what I believe, but I'm at least open-minded. So that's what we mean by open-mindedness. Guys, comfortable with that?
Carl, was the flexible for somebody that's very assertive, like for example myself,
yeah,
and I want to scale down to a little bit of being the non-assertive person, with the flexibility part are taken counter there.
Quite correct. But now remember, just to correct you, you don't want to become non-assertive. You just want to move a little bit back to assertive. So what it means is if I know that I tend to be assertive, what does that mean? It probably means I tend to make statements, right? Instead of saying, hey, what about, I say, we must, you must, it must. And if I know that I'm like that, which means I'm possibly a little bit parent, what I need to do is I need to say, okay, I tend to be like that. Perhaps I'm a bit too dominating. And maybe what I'm going to do here again is turn what would have been a statement into a question. So instead of saying, hey, you know what we must do? I would say, hey, guys, what about doing this? What do you think if we did that? And just by changing the terminology, I'm opening the door for their views. If I say, you know what, we must, I'm kind of saying I'm not listening to anything else. If I say, hey, what about? I'm at least encouraging someone to give a different view. So does that make sense, Rocky?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So if we have a look, and it comes to exactly what you're talking about, if I want to start developing my flexibility, a couple of pointers there. The first one that I've put down there is we need to practice lateral thinking. Now, if you go right back to our very first day in class, we did that 9 dots exercise. Remember, think outside the box, lateral thinking, look at different ways of doing things. And that's important, important for flexibility, because quite often, if I know that I am very assertive and I'm not flexible enough, basically I've got one view. Lateral thinking is to say to myself, hey, I've got one view, but I'm sure there must be others. Let's look for other views. Let's look for different opinions. So be open to the fact that there are different ways of doing things. Although I'm passionate about A, hey, there could be B, there could be C. Let's look at things from a different perspective. And we'll see that becomes important in conflict as well. Another one, which I've already said to you, and you can do to be more assertive, but you can also do it to be more flexible, is ask questions. What would have been a statement, as Roxy just said, and I answered her, what would have been a statement? Let me turn it into a question. Hey guys, what about? I was thinking, do you think, would this work? What about that? Perhaps this. And although I'm still pretty sure that I'm right, at least I'm leaving the door open for people to come up with a different view and a different possibility. One of the most interesting and important ones for you as a manager is number 3, which is use the principles of rephrasing and restating. And the reason I put that in there is for you, your level of flexibility as a manager is partly how flexible and open-minded you are. But it is also partly how flexible and open-minded you are perceived to be. So your level of flexibility is not just how willing you are to listen to the views of others, it's whether you are perceived to be willing. So you get some guys, some people who quite often are very adult, perhaps, maybe a bit parent, but basically is they come across, or they suffer from what I call the brick wall syndrome. When you talk to them, it's like talking to a brick wall. They just stare at you. There's no acknowledgement. There's no, I'm listening. They just stare at you. And if I'm talking to someone and they're just staring at me, my perception has to be these guys are not even listening. So basically, how flexible are you and how flexible are you perceived to be by your staff? And what that means you've got to do is you've got to be able to manage the brick wall. And how do you manage the brick wall? How do you bring that brick wall down? Is you rephrase, you restate, you say, aha, okay, carry on. But rephrasing and restating is where you're listening and you're saying, listen, You haven't convinced me yet, but what you said was A, B, and C. Have I understood you correctly? So you've said this, this, and this. Is that correct? I'm not saying to that person, I agree with you, but I'm saying, hey, I'm listening. I've understood. Keep talking. So for some people who have that brick wall syndrome, you manage it by rephrasing, restating, aha, yeah, okay, keep talking. You haven't convinced me yet, but I'm listening. It's trying to manage that brick wall. Okay. And then the final one there is control emotions. And the reason why I put that there is people become inflexible because they become emotional. And you'll often see it in business. A guy is arguing for his way, his way, his way, not because it is the right way, but because it was his idea. We must do B, we must do B. And it's not that B was better, it's because I came up with B. In other words, I'm now arguing from an emotional basis, not a factual basis. Control the emotions, excuse me, try and take emotion out of it and say, okay, let's look at this rationally. So perhaps coming back to what we said earlier, I want to be very adult. Let's look at the facts. And if your facts outweigh my facts, we'll go with what you're saying. Okay. So those are just some pointers on flexibility. Happy so far?
Yes.
Okay. And then, guys, we've got conflict. Now, I sent out that questionnaire. I don't know if any of you guys got that questionnaire and got to fill in that questionnaire.
Yes, yeah.
You have, okay. So let's have a look at it, and then we'll try and get to that questionnaire. So basically, conflict and conflict handling is described as a state of polarization, or the taking of opposing positions between two or more individuals, all right? Conflict is increasingly perceived as inevitable, often legitimate, and perhaps even desirable. Okay. Now, why, give me an idea, why would conflict be desirable? Because not many people like conflict. So why would it be desirable?
Because it gets everybody to say their piece.
Good, yes. In other words, it gets stuff out there in the open. Things that people have been thinking but haven't said. It gets people to say what they really feel. What else? I suppose it links to a similar point. What it can do is if one deals with conflict, it kind of clears the air. We get to move on. We've been going round and round on this issue. You know, you've often heard the phrase, the elephant in the room. We're not talking about this, we're not talking about this, but it's bugging everyone. And sometimes we raise it, we talk about it, and we can kind of get everybody's views. And hopefully we can actually move beyond it and move on to something else. But quite often people avoid it. They don't like it because it's not fun. But bottom line, there are times when it can even be necessary and desirable. But coming back, it is a state of polarization. In other words, people with different views. This guy says A, that guy says B, and it is conflict in terms of that. And basically what we do then is we have that questionnaire where we get you to have a look at your conflict handling style, because we see different styles of dealing with conflict. And basically we'll have a look at those. Now, those of you, let's just have a look at it. Let me just shut this. Basically, you should, if you were able to complete it, you should have done, let me hold this up, you should have done this page, right? Or at least have that page completed, right? And what you should have from that is scores down the bottom of that page. For those of you who managed to get the thing and do it, have you got those scores?
Yes.
Yes.
Then what you do is you take those scores, so at the bottom of each column, so your first column on that page says competing, there will be a score at the bottom there. Next one is collaborating, next one is compromise, next one is avoiding, next one is accommodating. You would have a score at the bottom of each of those. So let me just do a mock example here. So let's say,
Number 9.
Yeah, B, first column. Okay.
Also, that was on the first column.
First column, yeah, first column. Okay, 9, first column B. Whilst you're doing that, let me just do this. What is also important when you guys fill in that questionnaire, right at the beginning it says picture yourself with views differing to somebody else. hopefully when you completed that questionnaire, you pictured one person and you answered all of the questions with that person in mind. And I didn't give you those instructions. But when doing it, it's quite important to do that. And the reason why is I may answer those questions differently, whether it is this person, or excuse me, or that person. So if I had to answer all of those questions thinking of my wife, I might answer them differently compared to if I was thinking of my colleague or my boss or my employee. But it doesn't matter if you didn't do that, but that's ideally what you would do, is picture one person and answer all of those questions with that person in mind. Okay, guys, if you, yep, questions? Okay, Norman, I see you didn't get the questionnaire. We'll make a plan on that. But let's then go back to this, and let's say you have got that. You have added up. And if you have a look at the bottom of the page, there I have added up. Let's say this is a fictitious person, but we have got 10, 4, 8, 9, and 2. Those were the scores at the bottom of each of those columns. You then take those scores and you then put them onto this page, all right, which is what I call the graph page, and you plot the first one, the second one. So if you have again a look at the top it goes competing, collaborating, compromise, avoiding, and accommodating. So basically you can then plot your scores based on what you had on that page. So you would transfer them directly from there onto that, and that would give you kind of a graph type of picture. And from that, you can then have a look at your dominant conflict handling style, depending on the person you were picturing when you filled it in. And that's important because, as I say, I may have filled it in slightly differently if it was my boss versus my wife or something like that. Okay. Have you managed to do that, those of you who've got the questionnaire?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just try and give you an idea as a sort of a random example. So if we've got this as an example, we've got a person here who is very high on the first one, which is competing. So this person here tends to use a strong competing style, and your competing style tends to be what we call win-lose. Your competing style is I win, the other party loses. And if we go back to what we've talked about, your person who's competing tends to be high on assertiveness and fairly low on flexibility. All right, they tend to be high on assertiveness and fairly low on flexibility. Then you would see this person is very low down here on collaborating. So they tend not to use a collaborating style. I'll come back to each of these. But they're quite high on a compromise. Your collaborating is win-win, right? Your collaborating is win-win. Your compromise is part win, part win. Your avoiding is exactly what the word says, they avoid conflict. So this person is interesting because they are very high on competing. They win, the other party loses, or avoiding is lose-lose. So avoiding means we don't even talk about the issue. And therefore I lose, they lose, we don't even talk about it. So what you would see with this person, which is interesting, is they either fight very, very hard or they don't fight at all. Okay, either I fight so that I can win, and if I've got no chance of winning, I don't even talk about the issues. That's what you would see here. What would help them a little bit is the fact that there is some compromise. So there are some times when they'll try and win, and you can see they're very low on accommodating. They will not give in. So a person like this is usually pretty assertive. All right, sometimes assertive, sometimes not assertive. But what is common here is this person in that relationship is pretty inflexible. They don't give in. They either fight and don't give in, or they don't fight, but they don't give in. And basically, that's what you would typically see. So depending on what your highs are, you look at what are your highs, look at what your lows, and that will tell you a little bit about your style of dealing with conflict with that particular person. Question so far?
No.
Okay. Anything? Okay,
I was
so
in shock actually when I saw that about me.
sorry, what was that?
I was in shock when I saw that about me.
Is it, what was your styles like?
With the first column being competitive,
Yeah.
it's 11.
Yeah, okay. Next one.
Collaboration, which I never, it's number 6.
Okay, yeah.
Sharing, 6. Avoiding, 5.
Mm-hmm.
Accommodating, 3.
Oh, wow. So in that relationship, you're being very assertive. Hey, you win, they lose. Okay.
Yes.
So if we have a...
Judging with the previous ones we did as well.
Yeah, correct. So what does it mean? It means highly assertive, which is really good, but be careful. In that relationship, it looks like you need to be a bit more flexible because you win, they lose. Okay, and that's really what that's saying. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have a look at the styles, avoiding, as you can see there, is lose-lose. I don't talk about it. I get nothing. You get nothing. We don't talk about it. Accommodating is where I just give in. I accommodate. In other words, I lose, they win. Whatever you want is fine. So there, on your accommodating, I am low on assertiveness, high on flexibility. Go back to avoiding. Avoiding is I'm low on assertiveness, but low on flexibility. Accommodating, low assertive, high flexibility. Collaborating is highly assertive and it is highly flexible. It's supposedly, I suppose, the ideal one if it was possible. It's a full win-win. I'm assertive. I fight for what I want, but hey, I'm flexible. I try and give them what they want. Competing is I win, they lose, which means I'm assertive and I am inflexible. You get nothing and I push for everything I want. And then compromise is kind of assertive, kind of flexible. I push a bit, I give a bit, and it's kind of in the middle, and that's why it is a part win, part win. Okay. Now let's just have a look then at when would you, could you, should you use these different styles. And as with all of these models, there's no right or wrong. At different times, different styles have value. When could you, should you, or would you use an avoiding style? An avoiding style is valuable when tensions are high and that you feel a cooling down period is necessary. In other words, we're having an argument, we disagree, one of us is starting to get upset. Just now I say something that I'm going to regret because I'm getting to be emotional, an angry child perhaps. That's maybe time just to walk away. But as you can see, it's not a long-term strategy, it's a short-term strategy. Walk away, calm down, take a deep breath, come back tomorrow, we'll talk again. But I know that if I carry on talking now, I'm going to say something I regret. Cooling down period. It may be valuable to use an avoiding style when I need to buy time. Somebody is asking me about an issue. I don't even know the answer. I can't answer them. I just ignore it. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk about it. In other words, I buy time to go and do some research. The next two I would put together. I might use an avoiding style when my chances of winning, well, sorry, I have very little power, so I'm going to lose anyway, and therefore my chances of winning are small. If I get nothing, you get nothing, lose-lose, I'm not going to give in anything. I'm going to lose, you're going to lose, we're going to get a lose-lose. Nobody's going to win. And the interesting one there is when I decide to lose the battle in order to win the war. What does that mean? You decide to lose the battle in order to win the war.
To keep the peace.
Well, to keep the peace is more about having little power, no chances of winning. But I lose the battle in order to win the war.
It gives someone time to gather the information in order to win. So you give them the idea that they've won, but meantime, you're just going to come back harder with something else.
To a degree, that's a little bit of the buying time. You'll lose the battle in order to win the war is where the battle is small thing and the war is a big thing. And that's where I've got two issues with you. The one is a small issue that we should discuss this week. And I know in 2 weeks' time, there's a big issue you and I have to discuss. And that's why I decided to just ignore this little issue. Let's not even talk about it, the small one, because all I'm going to do is upset you. Which means when we have to discuss the big issue, you're already angry. So I ignore the small issue because I need to make sure I haven't upset you when it gets to the bigger issue. I lose the battle, the small one, or I give in on that, or I ignore that because I'm going to tackle you on a big one. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Give away a 2 basket instead of a 3 basket in basketball.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. All right. So that's your avoiding. If we have a look at your accommodating, this is where you are non-assertive, but you are flexible. In other words, you don't fight, but you kind of try and give the other guy what he wants. You don't push for what you want, but you give the other person what they want. When would you do that? When would you use this accommodating style? Low assertive, high flexible. The outcome is not important to you. You don't care. Green, blue, don't really care. Whatever you want is fine because it really is not important. You might use that when peace and harmony is more important than winning. In other words, yeah, we could have a fight. I might win, but I just like to have peace and harmony. Right? That's more important than winning. When I have little power, so the chances I'm going to lose anyway. If I'm going to lose, I might as well keep the other person happy. And that links quite often to the last one when the relationship is more important than the issue at hand. In other words, I could have an argument with my boss. I could prove to him that I am right. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to harm that relationship. Okay. So that's where sometimes it's a good idea to shut up and say yes. It's not a great style, but there are times when it is just not worth the fight. Okay. Make sense? What's that phrase? What pick your battles wisely? There's certain things that are not worth fighting about. Rather go on to something more important. Okay. That's your accommodating. You're competing. This is where the person is very assertive and inflexible. I fight for what I want, and I don't give an inch. When would I use that? When the issues are very important to me, my stake is big, I can't afford to lose this. When I have more power or authority, so I can dominate that other person. When a decision has to be made quickly, in an emergency situation, and in a deadlock. That's where I just go in, I dominate, I win, you lose, that's it. I use my power, my authority, and that's it. I win, the other party loses. And there's times when you need to use that. But be careful of this style, because if I keep winning and the other party keeps losing, eventually they don't want to talk anymore. They don't even want to deal with me. So it's not great from a long-term point of view, but sometimes it is necessary in the short term. Okay, that's competing. Then we look at compromise, partly assertive, partly flexible. I give some, I get some, kind of stand up for my rights to kind of give you what you're looking for. When would one use a compromising style? When both parties have an equal amount of power. You want a quick resolution. Temporary solution, other methods fail. In other words, you have the same power as me. I can't dominate you. You can't dominate me. We've been going on and on for ages. We need a quick solution. And maybe to allow us to come back to the negotiating table next month, you take A, I take B, I can live with it, you can live with it, and basically we can at least move on. And that's where you may use a compromise, part win, part win. It can be an interim strategy. It could be your final strategy. And then finally, we have full collaboration, fully assertive, fully flexible. I push for what I want and try and give you what you want. It is assertive and flexible. Issues are important to both parties. The relationship is an ongoing, interdependent one. I need you, you need me. The levels of power are similar. I can't dominate you, you can't dominate me. Both parties are committed to resolving the conflict. And most importantly, we have enough time, because a collaboration takes a lot of backwards and forwards, and it takes a lot of time. Okay, and that's pretty much the different styles. Comfortable so far? Guys?
Yes.
Questions, comments? Questions, comments?
No.
Okay, so question from my side. Two questions, a couple of questions. Is julle lekker moeg?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm looking at the clock.
No, but my head is paining.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I told you, hey, 1 o'clock we're done. I see it's like almost 4 o'clock. I'm like so many beers behind. I'm going to have to drink heavily now. I apologize, guys. I didn't think it would take this long. Thank you very much for still being with me. I see I've still got 19 people, so thank you. Guys, what I have done, in my opinion, is I've kind of covered everything that I would have covered in class. Any questions, any concerns so far?
I think everybody's question is probably going to go around the exam. What to obviously look at and how we're going to be doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, when are we going to do the exam?
Okay. The how and the what, I can talk about. The when, I have no clue. But let me try and answer these. Okay, so guys, let's talk about the exam. The exam will be an open book exam. Okay, the exam will be open book. Remember, that's not necessarily good news. All right, because with an open book exam, I am testing application. I need to see that you can apply what we talked about. The theories will be in front of you. I need to see that you can apply it. And that's why a good example was what we had this morning when we talked about Herzberg on motivation, right? And it doesn't have to be Herzberg, but if I said how you're going to motivate people in Aztec, I need to see that you've understood what we were talking about. You could choose Herzberg, you could choose Maslow, you could choose McClelland, I don't mind. But you got to show me that you understood what the guy said. You can't say, I would use Herzberg and I would look at his hierarchy of needs, because then you're talking nonsense, because he never came up with a hierarchy of needs. That was Maslow. So clearly you don't know what you're talking about. So if I had to say, how would you motivate the people? You say, I would choose Herzberg. Then I'd expect to hear or see you writing about hygiene factors, motivational factors. I'd expect you to at least understand what are some of the hygiene factors in Aztec, the machines, the computer, the spares. Aha, okay, this guy understood what a hygiene factor is. And I'd expect to hear something about praise and recognition in terms of, aha, she clearly understood what motivational factors were. So basically, it's an open book exam, and I need to see application of the theories. The core of the exam is going to be, as I said, leadership. Leadership will be based on ASTIC. So ASTIC is the case study you will get in the exam, right? You won't get it, but you will know it. And the reason I use ASTIC in this exam is because of exactly what I've just said. You know ASTIC, I know ASTIC, we know ASTIC. You spend a whole lot of time going through ASTIC, and we analyzed it and we looked at it from the thinking skills. And the reason why is your exam is a 2-hour exam. If you have a look at ASTIC, it took you at least 2 hours to really get to understand ASTIC. I cannot give you a new, different case study and expect you to read it, understand it, and then still be able to answer the questions. So I've got to give you something that you already know, right? You already know ASTIC, and therefore you need to know that it's going to be based on ASTIC. Okay, and it's going to be 70 marks on leadership, and it'll come from ASTIC, and I'm basically going to say, if you were the manager leader of ASTIC, tell me how you would do A and B and C and D and E, all right, and F, okay? So basically, as much as it is a 70-mark question on leadership, it's not as bad as that, because it's like 12, about 12.5 mark questions or whatever that comes to make up to 70. So, and it's, remember I kept saying that list is important, that list is important. It's not exactly that list, but I'm going to be saying, if you're managing ASTIC, tell me about how you would lead it. Tell me about your leadership style. Tell me how you would motivate the people. Tell me how you would empower the people. Tell me how you would have a performance-orientated culture, et cetera, et cetera. So I need to see that you can apply those things. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then there will be a 30-mark question, which will be more so your 70-mark question on leadership will be based on ASTIC. Your 30-mark question will be based on your organization. And what will that be about? What will be the topic for the 30-mark question? Any ideas?
Well, more or less what we had to do with our assignments, the leadership styles.
No, that's part of your 70-mark, right? That's leadership styles that you would use in your 70-mark question. Participative or autocratic or participative, you could use that in ASTIC. So that would be under leadership. So I'm not going to ask that in the 30-mark question.
Okay. That mark will be under management.
Sorry, say that again?
It will be under management.
No. Management leadership, I put all together for that 70-mark question.
Okay.
Would it be under section 7, the managerial competencies?
Competencies. Guys, let's go back to it very, very quickly. What have we talked about in broad terms? We've talked about thinking skills, interpersonal skills, and leadership skills, right?
Yeah.
70 mark will come from leadership. The other 30 will come from?
Thinking skills.
No. So that only leaves one.
Interpersonal.
Yes, it's going to come from interpersonal. So that interpersonal, remember, is communication, assertiveness, flexibility, and conflict. So your 30-mark question will be about in your company, in your department, in your division, tell me about the interpersonal skills. So there you would be able to say, okay, there's so many people in the department. This guy's very parent, that one's child, this one does this, that one does this. We tend to be very assertive, or we tend to be aggressive, or we're not assertive. We deal with conflict, we don't deal with conflict. We deal with conflict in this way. And so basically you're just going to show me a good understanding of those different interpersonal skills: communication, assertiveness, flexibility, and conflict, by talking about your division, your department, your section.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, copied.
Does that make sense? So that's kind of the exam. The difficult question, which I can't answer, guys, is when this exam will be. And obviously, because the exam at this stage is something that we have to do where we get you face to face into your classroom, so we can examine you in a controlled environment. So that's going to definitely not be in the next 3 weeks, given that we're still in lockdown. And then it depends on what happens from there.
You can give us the exam on the email, like the assignment.
Oh, and then we can have a group discussion and answer. I was expecting that suggestion somewhere along the line. Okay.
On a serious note, Carl.
Yeah.
On a serious note, Carl.
Yeah.
I'm thinking now, since this exam is open book, so the only thing that you need to control is the time. And if you can control the time, I'm certain there are softwares where that can allow us. I don't know if they are free, like Zoom, but that can allow us to write an exam in 2 hours.
Now,
with preloaded questions.
You're 100% correct. So there is software, or there's a process. There's a process. I don't know if it's a process or a software. There's something called proctoring. And the university is busy exploring it. It is a way of doing online exams. Okay, so there is something that looks at that, but are we not yet at a stage where I can tell you what it looks like, and I'm not yet at a stage where I can implement it. But you're right, there must be a way of doing that. The key thing that one has to control is the time, and that there's nobody there helping the individual. Because although it's open book with you and your books. It's not open book with you, your books, your brother, your sister, and your uncle. Okay. You know what I'm saying?
It's also, well, I like where we have to go into class and actually write it, is that you have no distractions around you. Like, for example, family, my son is 6 years old, so he's forever like, mommy, mommy, mommy the whole time. So that's going to play against time. So I rather do the exam in class. That's my personal opinion.
Look, at this stage, we have no choice. We have to wait because I haven't got an alternative. But Bantu, you're correct. We are looking at those other options. And Roxy, your point is valid, because even if I find that option, I will be putting you into a situation where there's disruptions. So yeah, at this stage,
personal skills.
Yeah. Tell your child to footsack. Yeah, that's not good. Okay. No, I can't give you an answer, guys, but what I can do is say, make sure you, when is that assignment due? Is it not soon?
On the 24th.
Okay.
Mine's already in. Anybody else?
I know yours is already in. But basically, you've got the assignment, focus on that. Start reading through this and kind of preparing for the exam. We're going to give you warning before. We're not going to suddenly say you got the exam tomorrow. You know what I mean? So what your challenge at this stage is not to forget what we've covered. Keep going through it casually so that you remember it. And the more you go through it, the more familiar it will be, so that when we do say an exam is in a week's time, it's not going back and trying to remember everything that we covered. So the kind of thing that you probably need to do is just every few days kind of go through a section and remind it. We'll send you the recordings. Just look at part of it. You just want to keep the stuff current, so that you're not starting from scratch. Remember, with an open book exam, you are studying for understanding. You don't have to memorize because the book will be in front of you. You're studying for understanding. So take a section and make sure, aha, that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, go back and study it again until it makes sense. You know what I mean? So Herzberg makes sense, McClelland makes sense, but it can't just be a theory in your head. It's, okay, so how would this work? So he's so-and-so, let me apply it to my team. That guy's got a need for power. You know what I mean? Now it's starting. So you're studying for understanding, not for memory. So make sure you're understanding everything. That's what you're doing over the next few weeks.
Okay. And then, Carl, would there be a possibility that you could email your slides through to us?
I did. I sent them yesterday.
They have been emailed.
Yeah, we got them.
Yeah. If you haven't got them, just email me back. Just send me an email and I will respond on that. But I did send them last night or yesterday evening.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. I'll
check
check
these recordings. Okay. Guys, comfortable so far?
Yes, we are.
All right.
As a pig in squitum.
Sorry, what?
As a pig in squitum. We're comfortable.
You're comfortable. Okay. All right. Thank you. Because that I didn't get. Okay.
I had to know what you were talking about next.
Cool. Now, the next question, and I don't know that we need to answer it now, but basically what I also need to do for you guys is to find out what's next. Because there's no point that we're finished with this module and then we leave you for another 3 weeks. So my idea is that maybe what we do is we've finished this one, you start preparing slowly in the background, and what I'm thinking we might need to do is to start with another module so that at least you've covered 2 modules, although that puts you under pressure for 2 exams later, but at least we keep the learning going. I don't see the merit in you now, not having contact for the next 3 weeks. What are your views?
I agree.
Okay. Guys, you don't have to answer, but I'm going to send it out on the WhatsApp. Just give me your views or how do we do it. I am going to see if we can't start another module fairly soon. So similar to what we've done here, the theory of it and the assignment, and then you've at least done 2 assignments. And yes, we'll deal with the exams when we have to deal with the exams. If
That's
we
right,
find a better
yeah.
way online to do the exams, we would obviously do that as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to, Kyle, you said you gotta check with vets the cheap data that they're offering.
Well, they're not offering. I need to check why they're not offering. So yes, let me have a look at data and let me just see, because this becomes very expensive if you're not on company data. So let me see.
Lionel is.
Sorry, what?
Lionel is.
Is what?
He's using company data.
Okay, well, that's cool. But some people, some people are not, and that becomes expensive. And I haven't got an answer for you, but I will follow up on that one.
I'm not.
Okay.
Thank
Guys?
you.
I have a question, Carl.
Yes.
In respect of us having questions, whether it has to do with the assignment or us preparing for the exam, do we email you or ask on the WhatsApp group?
Whichever you prefer. If you think it's a question that's going to help everyone, you can send it on the WhatsApp. Otherwise, you can send it private to me privately on WhatsApp, or you can email, whichever you prefer. Whichever you prefer.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Guys, that's it, unless there's any other questions.
No, that's it.
That's it.
Asante Sana, thank you very much. Sorry that we went so long.
Santi.
Auntie, I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Enjoy what's tomorrow, Sunday.
Are you going to share the video as well, the recording?
Yeah, I'm going to send the recordings.
I can't get over Musa's voice, guys. Like, it's rough, man. Yeah.
Okay, guys, for me, it's beer time. I don't know if you've got beers left, but I still have beers left.
It's whiskey time now, okay.
Is it whiskey time already? We went right past beer into whiskey.
So are you going to send us the video as well?
Yes, I'll send you this recording. Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, guys. Have a good day. Have a good evening.
When I'm going at the level.
No, when you have a husky voice. Yo, let's go rob a bank with that voice.
Okay, guys, I'm going to end the session. Cheers, everybody.
Bye, Carl.
Yes,
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Bye.